It is common among our mentally oppressed and spiritually abused country folk to have a negative emotional reaction to the idea of a Christian political movement. Worse, they are terrified of a Christian state. Even among Christians, we find a terror which asphyxiates their hearts into complete inaction, giving the sphere of civil governance over to the pagan, thinking it more pure and holy to have godless and unholy peoples rule over them. Does not the Lord judge the land according to the deeds of the kings of the land? Then if we are so quick to make our rulers those who are unpleasant to our very Lord, do we not subject our land to judgment by our own hands? It must be a truly peculiar strain of madness which our people suffer, to think it better to be ruled by heathen and the synagogue of Satan, rather than those holy and sanctified saints of Christ. But we do not seek a Christendom which in old and medieval Europe knew. We must learn from our grandmother land's mistakes. She suffered the consequences of missteps, not for us to tread the same path, but to learn to avoid the pitfalls along the track. That is, we do not, as a movement, seek to once again marry the church with the state, as was the heart and tradition of our older brothers. It was a landscape where prelacy reigned in the place of civil authorities and fathers who have certain jurisdictions. This sphere sovereignty which our Dutch brethren brilliantly conceived is our heart and our drive. We use this language of separation between church and state from one of our founders, Thomas Jefferson, who is in many ways the most liberal and humanistic of our founders. It is therefore not surprising that the language has been taken up by liberals through the ages to suggest that our founders sought a government which disassociated the morals of the Christian faith entirely from the public square. While this is wholly opposite to our foundations as a nation, it is our conviction to continue with our heritage against an established church, of which we must amend our First Amendment to our Constitution. It currently says that there is a freedom to religion and the practice thereof, as well as a point of prohibition against an established church. These words must be changed to look closer to that of our elder brothers in England with the Act of Tolerance of 1689. That is, we may tolerate all Protestant Christian faiths that are aligned with the ecumenical creeds, but we cannot and shall not tolerate the Nicolaitans, no matter what stripe or garment they currently adorn themselves with. The Hindu has no part of these United States. The Mussulman have no portion in this land. The Jew cannot possess this nation with their Antichrist claws. The putrid doctrines of the impure and satanic religions have no place in our blessed country. Our pluralistic society has done nothing but bring curses upon our once shining land. Therefore, we must establish Protestant Christianity as the only legitimate faith in our country and pay homage to the Son. This does not look like, however, an established church where pastors and bishops rule over counties and towns. Rather, we see it fit to distinguish between ecclesiastical ministers and civil ministers. Yet we maintain that no matter which kind of minister you are in this country, you ought to be a Christian one. The false worshippers and blasphemers will necessarily corrupt our land and pollute it with vain idolatries unto our complete and utter ruin. Furthermore, Christian ministers will not work for the sake of money, but for the glory of Christ. they will be held to the greatest standard of ethics, having upon their hearts and consciences not only the weight of their inferior neighbour, but also the fear of God's unimpeachable and holy tribunal. Civil ministers will have to pass tests of faith to determine whether they are truly able and qualified to enter into public ministry. Not only this, they must be found as members in good standing in Orthodox churches. This is so that these ministers have yet another check upon them, and this from the ecclesiastical sphere. There are words I can hear, even as I write these words. They say with ignorant and hasty lips, there are a great deal of Christians who not only fail in their tasks through immorality, but are truly immoral themselves. This is not wrong. But whereas a Jewish civil minister may act and legislate immorally, and still be in keeping with his abominable religion, the Christian civil minister is not. He is therefore accountable where the Jews and the unbelievers are not. They have neither God nor conscience, which makes them a terrible threat to our people, even as they have been a scourge upon us. For when we say minister, we mean as high as the highest executive, to the lowest pencil pusher, and every officer in between. We look not only to our princes, but also to the laws that they must legislate and execute. The laws, like in the days of old, shall be debated upon their scriptural fidelity to Christ's law of liberty. No longer shall we suffer the puerile imaginations of godless ideologies and what is called natural law, but is nothing more than a means of avaricious men to legislate perversity. For they look for answers in a fallen and corrupt nature, rather than the pure revelation which comes specially from God. Our restoration of our land will include a restoration of our governing authorities and laws. It cannot happen any other way. It is not the way of the Lord to save a people, and in so doing only save the materially poor and oppressed. Kings and princes are saved too. There is no limitation thence, that we Christians cannot politically move now in such a way as to remove the godless from positions of power and replace them with the godly saints of Christ. It is therefore our responsibility, and as far as we are able, our duty, to make our government a body of men subject to the King, King Jesus. Such a ruling class will then have always an authority which they must fear. This is to protect the people from tyrants. Tyranny is borne upon the air of those men who have no fear of God or men, but instead wield terror as the swaggering rod of their own. Let princes fear for their heads if they reject and oppose the metanomos of Christ King.